My name is Herbert H. Newman. I was born in 1919 on a farm near Maysville, Missouri. However, I grew up in Plattsburgh, Missouri, and graduated from high school there in 1938. I was drafted in the Army in August of 1942, and the Army sent me to the Army Air Corps, and I remained there until April of 1945, when I was relieved from active duty as a flight officer, bombardier in the Air Force. After relief from active duty, I remained in the reserve and was promoted to Chief Warrant Officer. However, after the Korean War broke out, I volunteered to go back on active duty and was taken back on active duty in April of 1951. I went back on active duty in April of 1951. In September of 1951, I joined the 17th Infantry in Korea, and I remained there as a Regimental Supply Officer for the regiment until August of 1952, when I was transferred back to the States. I remained there until August, when I was transferred back to the 10th Infantry Division in Fort Riley, Kansas. I remained there and was transferred back to the 10th Infantry Division in August 1952. When I was in the 17th, and at the time I retired, Lieutenant Colonel Hal B. McCown was the regimental commander. However, he was replaced by Colonel Richard A. Risden from Washington, D.C., and he was there until I left. During my entire stay at the 17th Infantry, I was a regimental supply officer for the regiment for everything. When I was in supply in the 17th Infantry, we were stationed at Chuncheon, Huachan, Kumwa, Panmunjom, the Iron Triangle. We went into the winter of 51 and 52 with light clothing, old-style shoe packs, and blanket-type sleeping bags, because equipment had not been issued to us to issue to the troops. However, along in January and February, we started to receive the Mickey Mouse boots, the heavy cold weather equipment, and we wore that up until and into the spring. At that time, we were north of the 38th parallel and in mountainous country where the temperature dropped sometimes to 20 below zero, and men suffered terribly for the lack of proper clothing and equipment. However, they were trying at that time to get it straightened out. Due to the fact that we were late getting the men out of the heavy, cold weather boots and back into the leather boots that they wear in the summertime, some of the men's feet became too tender to walk on because of the sweat brought on by the hot weather. However, in May, or around toward the 1st of June, it may have been the 1st of May, however, they did eventually get the leather boots and do away with the cold weather Mickey Mouse boots. In my stay in the 17th Infantry, I thought that Colonel McCown and Colonel Risden were good, competent officers and were well liked by the officers and men within the regiment. There was never any conspiracy or anything that we even started to say that they were not sufficient for their position. At the time I was in the 17th Infantry, we were fighting a war, and not many people stopped to realize just exactly how important the 17th Infantry was to the United States Army. However, since that time, I have read and I have a feeling for the 17th Infantry that I don't have for a lot of the units I was in. The 17th Infantry, in my opinion, was a top-notch outfit and an asset to the United States Army, and always had been during the time of history. When I arrived in the 17th Infantry, a lot of the personnel there had been stationed with Colonel Powell as the regimental commander in Japan. He brought that regiment to Korea for the war. He was a dear commander to all those men, and they were to him too. All I've ever heard about Colonel Powell was that he was an excellent officer and was looked out for his men, and they wanted to look out for him. At those days, we did not have the integrated services where everyone goes to one supply office to receive their supplies or request their supplies. We had 7 different technical services, starting out the quartermaster, ordnance, engineer, signal, and so on. So it made it a lot more difficult for us to submit our requests in the fact that we had to hand carry our requisitions because there was no communication. We hand carried our requisitions to the various tech services, and then when we went to pick up our supplies, we had to go to the various technical services to supply us with what we needed. It's a lot different than it is right now. After I've been in the regiment for a few weeks, a friend of mine, Charles B. Shorter, the captain, came to the regiment and joined the heavy mortar company. 2 or 3 months later, the commanding officer had Captain Shorter transferred to the staff, and he became the S4 for the regiment, and my supervisor from then on until I left the 17th Infantry. After he had been there for a short time, he was promoted to major. He is the only officer I know who has served in all 3 combat branches, the infantry, the artillery, and the armored. Charles B. Shorter is a boy from Pleasanton, Kansas. Later on, Shorter, as a colonel, went to Vietnam, was wounded and lost his leg. I met him at my wife's funeral. You see, I didn't know about him losing his leg until he showed up at my wife's funeral in a wheelchair. Periodically, even though we were in service company, we were shelled with artillery and mortar. So it wasn't a home-free situation where you could just set up a tent and live in the tent. We were required to dig bunkers and shelters to protect ourselves anytime we were on the line. After I rotated from the 17th Infantry, I went to 10th Infantry Division. My assignments were various and sundry. First, I was Station Property Officer at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan at Camp Lucas. Then I went to Europe to the 7th Corps Headquarters. I was supply officer for 7th Corps Headquarters. And from there, I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I was supply officer in the Artillery and Missile School. When that was over, I went back to Europe and was supply officer for a missile battalion, a cross missile battalion, stationed at Schaffenburg, Germany. After I left Schaffenburg, I came back to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, where we organized and started running the 5th Corps Artillery. I was in the helped organize the 16th Artillery. The 6th of the 16th was the unit that I was the supply officer. We transferred from Fort Chaffee after they were closed over to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and we stayed right within there within the 5th Corps Artillery. From 5th Corps Artillery and 16th Artillery, I went to Vietnam and back. I went to Korea and back, where I was supply officer for 8th Army Headquarters, back to the Officer Candidate Brigade at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I stayed there for a couple of years, and my last overseas assignment, I went back to Vietnam. I was stationed to the 3rd Regional Assistance Command, supply officer for the Assistance Command, stationed there at the old plantation near Bien Hoa. It's while I was there that I requested relief from active duty due to the fact that I had my 30 years in. They sent me back to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I was retired in April '72, 30 years after I had joined the Army in 1942 there at Fort Leavenworth. In my service, I have the usual amount of service ribbons. However, I did get 3 or 4 citations for a good job. My first Bronze Star was earned while I was in the 17th Infantry. The second Bronze Star I got was for the same deal. I had a pretty good job. I was supply officer for Army Headquarters in Vietnam. My commendation ribbon, I got a commendation ribbon for being the supply officer at 7th Corps headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany, and a commendation ribbon for being the supply officer for the Officer Candidate Brigade in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Now, the Good Conduct Medal is the last medal that I earned, one of the medals, a medal of achievement. I received after having had 1 year of good conduct at Tulsa, Oklahoma, in Spartan School of Aeronautics, where I was training to be a pilot in primary flying training. All in all, in my life, I'm very satisfied. I don't know that I have any regrets at having been in the military at any time, and neither now nor when I was in the military. One of the things I'm most proud of is my sons were proud of me. And my son once told me when he was in college, and he went to a new class, and the professor asked, "What does your dad do? And what does your dad do? And what does your dad do?" My son said he was always happy to tell him that I was in the Army and in Vietnam.